now. Thank you both for joining us to talk about your campaigns for the Portland School Board position number 5. I just wanted to start off by having each of you give a quick statement about who you are and why you're running and why voters should choose you. And I think, why don't we start with Gary first?
Awesome. Well, thank you again for having me. Hello, Dan. How's it going? Nice to see you. Nice to talk to you again. So my name is Gary Hollands. Of course, I'm running for Portland Public School Board Zone 5. The reason, a little bit about who I am and why I'm running. I am a husband, father, son, business advocate, born and raised here in Portland, Oregon. I am a proud alumni of Portland Public Schools systems. My kids are here as well in the Portland Public School system. And one of the main reasons why I'm running, or 3 main reasons why I'm running. One is to expand career, technical, and vocational education for the public schools, going all the way down to the middle schools and even introductory into the elementary schools as well. Another reason why I'm running is I really want to look at closing and addressing the academic gap in reading and math for Black and Brown students. That is a big issue that has been plagued for our system for a while now. So my goal is to try to help push that needle over to closing that gap even more. And of course, representation. I believe the racial and cultural diversity of the staff needs to reflect the kids that we serve. I always use an example of kids looking at their school pictures. And when they look at their school pictures, they're looking for themselves first. And so our kids are not seeing themselves in the school picture, so therefore they're no longer interested in the education system a lot. So those are some of the main reasons why I'm running for Portland Public School Board Zone 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about why you're running?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And Gary, it's good to actually do a video conference with you and see you face to face. So
yes.
A little bit about myself. So I unlike Gary, I am not from Portland originally. I first came here in the summer of 2019 to start my practice as a family physician. And unfortunately, within that first year, we all had been affected by this COVID pandemic. So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind since I got here. When I first got here, I knew that I wanted to be involved with the education system. I have a now 2-year-old daughter. She just turned 2 on Sunday. And so I started looking at the schools, trying to learn about the education system she was going to enter and hopefully better it in some way. But at the time when I first got here, I wasn't sure how I would be most effective at really bringing my ideas to the school system. As the pandemic raged on, I started to see a lot of my pediatric patients, especially those with special needs and those who had individual education plans in place, they started to suffer a lot. And that's when I started to really think about how can I be most effective? And I really feel that being able to bring my background with healthcare to the system, and specifically the school board and District 5 director, would be the best way that I could affect a change in a positive direction. I hope to bring a fresh or different perspective to the table that reflects my experience as a leader and honest and transparent communication. And I really want to open up the communication and relationship with the community, really provide an avenue for people to engage with the board more than they can currently, to really hear all the concerns and really accurately reflect and take that back to the decisions the board makes. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'm hoping to bring. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's start off, and we'll probably just kind of alternate with whoever goes first. So Dan, if you are elected to the board, what concrete changes people see 4 years from now as a result of your being a member of the board?
Yeah. Well, obviously I can't speak in absolutes. I don't have a crystal ball, but what I hope to bring to the table and hope to accomplish, I think top of mind is where we're at right now with the pandemic and getting kids back into 100% attendance in person. Now, 4 years from now, I hope, regardless of whether or not I'm on the board, that we're not still talking about the pandemic and getting kids back in the classroom. But that is something that during the 4 years, during this next year, I think is going to be really, really important. And my background in healthcare, I think, is really going to be an asset there. I've seen these kids suffer. I think that in person is the best way forward, but it has to be done in a very safe way, not just safe for kids, not just safe for teachers, but safe for the entire economy of people that are involved when it comes to educating kids in person. And the situation continues to evolve. So I'm still optimistic that we'll hit the target for the fall, but we have to kind of keep our antennas tuned to the science and figure out the best path forward. So that's one. Another area that I hope to affect change, similar to Gary, is focusing on the vocational offerings, making sure that the kids that are in traditionally affluent areas, neighborhoods, have the same offerings that those in traditionally disadvantaged areas have. Whether that means figuring out a transportation, if you only have one teacher that for a specific type of course like business management, then perhaps you need to either hire other teachers who can offer the same thing, or figure out a logistical way to get the students from one zone into the building of the other to offer the same programs. Right now, it's not entirely equal or equitable. So that's another thing I hope to change. And overall, I think just improving the engagement and communication with the community. I hope to have, events. I don't know if other board members would be available, but on a rotating basis, go to different schools to really engage with the community, provide an opportunity for people to have their voices heard, and kind of in conjunction with internet availability, forums, and different avenues. But if we just did internet, then that could potentially exclude some families and things like that. So
thank you. And Gary, how about you? I guess what concrete changes do you anticipate Portlanders would see as a result of your being elected to the board? And you're muted right now. There you go.
All right, here we go. Yes. So concrete changes that I want to make when on the board. One, of course, is to expand the career and technical vocational courses. With that, there also look at how do we equal out the course offerings at different schools. So right now, if you look at the school courses, course curriculum in different schools, they each have different ones. And I really want to look into why they have different ones. So for instance, schools on the west side have business entrepreneurship. Schools on the east side, a lot of them do not. So I want to look at how do we equalize that out to be able to offer that. And of course, expand it. As a trucking school that I run, we actually have worked with private and public entities to be able to offer free truck driving CDL licenses for women and minorities. A lot of those collaborations that I've done with the business community, the one constant thing that I hear is we want to work with the district. We want to be able to come in and offer construction. We want to be able to come in and help offer electrical trainings, and for me, trucking training for our students. So I think there is a big opportunity for us to work with the private industry to bring that in for Portland Public Schools as well. And so I think that's one concrete thing that I can try to change as being one of 7 board members to try to bring into school districts. We have currently, with our trucking academy, we currently have went to middle schools with our trucks for like career days and things like that. There's a lot of opportunities for that to happen moving forward. Another thing I think we can do while on the board is increase the cultural piece of staff. We can get more teachers of color into the schools. We can get more teachers of color into the administration. Those are things that we can do starting now. We don't have to wait for those things to happen. So as being on the board, I think that's one thing that we can collectively do together immediately. Also, I'm real big on transparency and communication. I think that's one of the things that the school district lacks is communication. And so with that, one of the things that I have planned on doing is doing listening sessions, kind of like what Dan was talking about or alluded to, but having listening sessions with the unions and having listening sessions with the teachers and parents and kids, of course, and administrative staff to be able to hear what they're saying, to not only listen to the parents that are always talking, but the ones that's not talking as well, the ones that don't have the means to be at board meetings, at 6 o'clock at night, those who cannot find that time to write the school districts or email and respond. So I think by having those listening sessions that we open up that communication between the community and our schools. And I think by doing that, then it'd be a lot easier for us to govern because we're governing from a sense of a whole, of a whole community as opposed to a select few that brings up issues at the school district. So I think those are the few things that we can do now, and that's what I hope to accomplish while on the school board. Thank you.
Great. So Gary, this question is now you'll go first on this, and the return to in-person instruction has been a huge focus of the school board, the school districts, families' attention, et cetera. How would you assess what the district decided on? Like, do you think that this is, too anything? Do you feel like it's appropriate? Do you feel like it's taken too long, or it's going too fast? Or, give me your assessment on just what the district is doing with regards to its plan for in-person instruction.
Thank you. So at the last board meeting, they had a superintendent alluded to them going to 5-day back coming fall, barring any restrictions from the governor. So I think we're on a good track. I think that the school district handled it the best that they could from the beginning. At the beginning, I think that, as a school board member, you're getting so many things from so many different sides. You're getting the parents that want the kids in school. You're getting the parents that have reservations about getting their kids in school. So I think, I think the school district did the best that they could. Of course, looking back on things, of course, you can look at, they could have did this differently or they could have did that differently. But I think moving forward, we have to look at, okay, from here on out, what's going to be best for our kids? Is that 5-day instruction? Is that doing something to where those that are uncomfortable sending their kids to school still have a path and an option to still get the instruction, whether it's online learning or whatever that may be. And I think that's where our focus should be on moving forward, is how do we figure out where our kids is at now and how do we continue from that point on? So that's kind of my thought process on that.
Do you think that the district should have moved more quickly to get students back into in-person instruction, to offer that option?
Say if it went either way, all I look at is where we're at now. It's easy to go back and second guess decisions that they made. So I think, once again, I think the focus should be what's best for our kids today, and moving forward, and not so much try to nitpick, what happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But it should be a learning opportunity. Hopefully this never happens again in life, but a learning opportunity of how to deal with something of this magnitude, moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Dan, same question for you. If you can kind of give me your assessment on the district's plan for the return to in-person instruction. Any thoughts about, any criticisms you have, any suggestions, any, what your diagnosis of it is?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'd echo a lot of what Gary said, to be honest, but, I hesitate to really criticize heavily the district. They, as well as all businesses and individuals at the beginning of this pandemic, were in a scenario that probably wasn't really planned out. They didn't have a plan in place for a global pandemic and what that would look like. So I do think that with the evidence, the data they had in front of them at the beginning, that they made some good decisions. To your question follow-up question that you had asked Gary about, could they have done things quicker? Should they have pushed for a return sooner? I think it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, and maybe it would have been better to try and get the kids back in school sooner rather than so close to the end of the school year. But there's also a lot of moving pieces there that I recognize, right? You have to have the safety be kind of the primal thing that you're considering, and you have to talk to the teachers' unions. You have to coordinate all those pieces. Everyone has to feel comfortable. Going forward, which is really what we should focus on, I think we both agree that getting kids back in school 5 days a week is really the best option. I recognize, though, that for some families, it's not so much about the risk to the kids. It's about other factors in the home. Some kids live in homes that are multi-generational, and some people can't get vaccinated due to medical conditions. So if there are other factors that would make a family not feel comfortable sending their kids to that environment and then having them come home, we need to be sensitive to that. And offering the hybrid option is something that's good, but there's so many moving pieces. Not any two kids are the same, and the ones that really have struggled are the ones that have some deficits or inability to have a stable internet connection and things like that the district can't always account for. But we need to figure out if we're not in a place where we can safely have everyone back in school 100% come the fall, we need to have a real brainstorming session with community leaders and the board itself to how can we do this better in a hybrid way, because the current implementation does not support the most vulnerable.
So if, just so I can kind of understand a little bit more in terms of your vision for the fall, when you say if we can't have 100% of people, are you saying that that everyone should remain in some kind of hybrid format? Or
I think, again, I hesitate because I know as a physician, if I say definitively yes or definitively no on certain things, that it carries more weight than a quote unquote lay person. So I want to give room, since we're talking months in advance. Should vaccines continue to roll out and numbers continue to come down and we don't see new variants and all of those ifs, then yeah, I think pushing for 100% in person, if it's safe to do so based on what's happening at the time, is what I would want. But we're seeing different things happen, right? So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine's now on pause. Pfizer came out today and said people likely will need a booster, a third booster at 6 to 12 months. So there's a lot of moving parts and we don't have all the information in front of us right now. So we have to be nimble in our decision making. If we're not able to safely have everyone back in school, I'd say reasonably safe, then what I would like to see happen is in increasing the amount of in-person time as an option, but still having a hybrid option that's potentially different than what's currently available for those families that don't feel safe having their kids in school due to whatever factor it may be. Maybe it's a patient or a parent who has cancer and is on chemo and hasn't been able to get vaccinated, whatever it may be. I don't want to exclude those families or, end up with a problem that we could have prevented, like an outbreak that then takes a parent away from a child. That's going to have a huge impact on that child's life, probably more than the education system for the next 4 years potentially would either way.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the role of a board member and the responsibilities. And Dan, I'm wondering if you can tell me just kind of what you think are the primary responsibilities a board member has and how you would go about fulfilling them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been looking into this because I've never been on the board before. And the Oregon Association of School Board Members has a lot of resources available. But, especially in the largest school district in the state, I think there's a couple of things that we need to really emphasize. So there's definitely the oversight of the superintendent and the role in ensuring that our kids are getting the education as we kind of put out in the framework, our direction and vision. So navigating the teachers union, the superintendent, creating a culture of accountability, I think is really something that we need to focus on. And that takes strong leadership because you have to hold yourself accountable too, and have to have clear directives. These are the goals, these are the benchmarks that we're going to look at. And I think that's something that we definitely, that's definitely an important role that I would take on as a board member. You can't really fairly hold the superintendent, for example, accountable for X or Y if you never set the standards to begin with. So that's a piece. Another piece, of course, is, I think being the interface between the community and then what's happening within the schools themselves and the school administration. I think that really falls squarely on the board. They're elected members, right? It's an unpaid position. So rather than these people who are hired by the district to do a job, or those who are representing the teachers or the families themselves shouldn't have to take on all of that on their own. The board, the people elected by the community should really be the ones that have that on their lap. They need to interface with the community. They need to make sure that we're representing the ideas and the initiatives that the community wants and push those forward. I don't want to take up too much time, so.
Thank you. And Gary, same question for you. I guess, what do you see as the primary responsibilities of a board member?
Kind of the same thing with Dan was saying. I didn't realize he wasn't getting paid, so I might have to change my idea when running. But no, I agree. As far as the oversight of the superintendent, of course, the hiring or firing of a superintendent as well, and making sure we setting the direction for the district, for the districts, and making sure that the superintendent, making sure there's metrics in place to keep him accountable as well. And also the thing that we have to, as a board, you are making sure that you're looking over the budget. Portland Public School has a huge budget. It's the largest school district in the state. So budget accountability is very big responsibility of the board. Being as a member of the board back in 2011 for MESD, I was able to really get a deep dive in what a board is supposed to be and how a board is supposed to run. And it's finished because we actually had I initiated a conference or a training session for us at MESD back then because I really didn't understand what it was. And they came out and did a training for us, which was great because even the other board members participated in as well. And the way they explained it to us was, you have a school bus. Now we're all on the school bus. We're telling the superintendent where to go, and you have to let him get there. And you set parameters and matrix to make sure that we're getting to that spot, and then hold them accountable. If we don't get there, you try to do a course of action. If something is going wrong, okay, well, what went wrong? How do we correct it? A corrective course of action, and then try to make sure we get there. It is definitely a collaborative undertaking with the board, the superintendent, and the community. And I'm with Dan on that. I think one of the responsibilities of the board is to represent the district and the community as well, because we're representing both sides. We're representing the people that vote for us, and we're representing the people that we're governing over. And I think, once again, that by doing that, you have to be out in the community, you have to be present in the community to do that. Because I think that will start building that public trust that Portland Public don't have, has been eroded over time, the public trust that the community has with the school district. But by being present, you start building that up. By doing listening sessions, you start building that public trust up. By having relationships, community relationships with organizations, you're building that collaborative piece up with it. And I think that is a board responsibility as well. So those are kind of what I think, as far as what the board responsibilities are for PPS. Thank you.
Thank you. So in previous years, there have been instances in which you've had a school board that has been fairly they haven't necessarily questioned the district or the superintendent on a regular basis, where there certainly there have been a number of things that have happened over the years in which there are growing inequities in course offerings. There have been problems in terms of not making sure that there's not lead in the water, et cetera. I guess, what is your approach? I guess, how would you hold the superintendent accountable? Like, what are the steps that you would take that would show steady oversight of the district? And I guess that would be for you first, Gary.
All right. So I think the first thing you do as a board member is, we're not there to rubber stamp anything. By being on the MESD board, a lot of the information we received was from the district. And so at the time, learning that there's other sides to the issue, and there's other sides to the amendments that come up, you have to really dig in and look at what those are and ask the right questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You have to question the district. You have to question the unions to say, hey, how is this directly affecting our kids? And I think a lot of times we get so enamored with our adult stuff, we forget about the reason why we're there for our kids. And so one of the things that I always look at when I'm either discussing with someone or talking with someone is, can you bring that conversation around to how it directly affect our kids? Because that's why we're here. We're not here for adult stuff, even though the adults are making decisions, but we're here for the kids that we're serving. And sorry, the screen went off.
Okay.
But we're here for the kids that we're serving. And so I think, like I said, as a board member, you really have to ask questions. When we're talking about the superintendent piece, we really have to get all the information. So like, for instance, you brought it back to with the lead piece back, when Carol Smith was in as a superintendent. And I think if had the board really did their research, not saying that they didn't, but did their research, they realized that was a national issue. These schools were built hundreds of some years ago. That's what contractors and them use for piping systems. And had you had someone on the board say, hey, you know what? This is not exclusive to Portland Public Schools. This is in all of the buildings that was built back in 80, 90 years ago. And start questioning that. It's like, okay, well, let's not worry about whose fault it is, because it's not one person's fault, because the people who was on the board or the superintendent that was there was not around when these buildings was built. So I think by asking those right questions, and then as you keep the superintendent accountable, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do about it now? How do we fix this now? What are the steps that we need to take now to get this stuff done? And I think, once again, by asking the right questions, by asking questions of everyone of how this is going to affect our kids, I think that's how you keep them accountable. And then if a superintendent is not doing the job that we set out for them, we figure out, hey, what is going on? What is it that you need? Is it that we need to go to the legislation and try to solicit more money for our students? Do we go knock on people's doors, to get the community involved? Do we go talk to the businesses that are looking to partner up with us to figure out what that is? And then you support that superintendent in doing that. And then if it's not working, then at that point, the last resort, we have to look at, okay, well, maybe we need to get a new person in place to be able to do that, because our kids don't have time to waste while we try to figure out getting it right. We just need to keep it in doing it, right then and there. Thank you.
I am kind of curious. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole that isn't directly relevant, but I am kind of curious about this view that the lead in water issue was, you're not looking at PPS's failures on that part, that it is mostly a national issue that's tied to the dates of when the construction occurred, because there are numerous moments over the past several years leading up to that in which PPS was aware of a problem of lead, and also just in the immediate response to it, once it was discovered that there was lead in the water, like harmful levels of lead. So I guess I am kind of curious about just, do you feel comfortable kind of asking questions in the moment, critical questions in the moment, when it's apparent that things are not being dealt with promptly or with urgency?
Oh, definitely. I think that's our responsibility to do that. If something is going up right then and there, I want answers now. And that's just how I am. Like, hey, what are we doing now? Our kids, if this is an issue that's coming up, those questions should have been asked up front. Well, why is this issue here? How do we stop this issue? And what do we need to do to correct the issue? But I agree. My goal, I would ask those questions right then and there. I wouldn't wait to ask those questions. And I'm a little different maybe, because I would try to go find some of the answers myself. Being in the construction world with the trucking piece, I can go talk to contractors. I can go talk with engineers and ask them, well, what's going on? Why is this issue happening with us? And not only why is it happening with us, what can we do about it now to keep our kids safe? And once again, it has to go back to keeping our kids safe. If that means, what they did is they start putting water bottles, water containers in the schools. We should be doing that up front while we figure out what's wrong, while we're figuring out what happens. We should discontinue the use of the water fountains right then. As soon as we find out there's an issue, okay, let's stop doing it, and then let's go here and fix the problem. But yeah, I 100% agree that I would ask questions right then and there. Mm-hmm. I've never been a problem. I've never been one to shy of asking questions.
Okay, thank you. And Dan, the same question for you, and it goes back to how do you how do you help develop that culture of accountability? How do you show the ability to hold people accountable for their actions?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think the culture of accountability is really what has to happen. I think the original question was about holding the superintendent accountable, but I think globally, holding everyone, including ourselves as board members, accountable starts with this culture, and it's from the top down. So first off, you want to, or I would want to define just a shared value system, a shared goal or multiple goals. I think at the very basic level, we could say we're all there because we're passionate about helping our kids and ensuring that they have the best opportunities. So if that's what we decide as a board, as the shared common goal when we're addressing this culture of accountability, then that's what you keep going back to. Because when you do have an issue of accountability, or when you do have disagreements, if you can come back to, well, let's take a step back from my emotions, how I'm narrowly looking at this issue, and say, well, let's look at it from the perspective of furthering the education, or whatever the shared goal is, you can often find more common ground. That's what I've dealt with in my professional life. One of those overarching goals is patient safety. So, when there are disagreements, if we can take a step back and say, well, let's look at it from the safety side, we can find some common ground. So starting there, making sure that we have a shared common goal. I think, you also have to, when you're setting forth an initiative, be it about lead in the water, or be it about, increasing availability of vocational offerings, when you start on that initiative, trying to think about where you want to be and what you can measure to ascertain after the fact, if you've gotten there from the beginning, is helpful, so that you can do cycles of quality improvement. So I look towards the Plan, Do, Study, Act type of quality improvement initiatives that I use in practice, but I think it could apply to most professions, and certainly in education, where it's a cycle. So you can start really anywhere in the cycle, but you kind of plan for the initiative that you're undertaking, you do something, so you implement it, and then you're studying what has happened and acting on it. So is it that you accomplished it or didn't accomplish it? And then that's where you can tap into the accountability. But you have to have those metrics and be clear about who's responsible for each part if you're going to hold people accountable. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that accountability is not all external. It's not all on teachers. It's not all on administrators or the superintendent. Some of it is on us as the board. And so we need to make sure that we're reassessing ourselves along the way as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Next question, and Dan, I think you'll go first on this, is just that we've seen over the past year a community-wide understanding of a need to change institutions and practices that contribute to systemic racism. And I'm curious if there are any specific changes that you would seek as a board member to help fulfill that goal at PPS.
Yeah, I think that the district had and has a good idea with the racial equity social justice program and efforts that they had started several years ago. I think it provides a good framework. It's a good start, but clearly it hasn't been as effective as maybe the words on paper looked like they would be. So I think in order to really affect significant change, we first have to understand where we failed. This gets back to the kind of quality improvement Plan, Do, Study, Act thing that I was mentioning before. But you have to look at those pieces. You have to really understand at the community level where these gaps are, and it's something that I don't have all the answers to right now as much as I would like to. And so I think getting boots on the ground, so to speak, being right there interfacing with the community is a good start. I agree with Gary that, you know, we all talk about diversity, but you don't necessarily see that in what the school, you know, the people who work in the school and everyone else looks like. So that can be disheartening to kids that are not represented. And so that's something that should be addressed. And I think we really need to get to these issues where our kids in these traditionally disadvantaged communities are not meeting the metrics the same as kids in other neighborhoods, particularly in that K-8 range. So I don't have a lot of concrete for what I would do, in part because I'm not on the board. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of competing voices, but what I would hope to accomplish and bring to the table is a fresh perspective, trying to really emphasize that interface with the community and understanding, and really making sure that we're trying to hold ourselves accountable, kind of study the failings and figure out a way to fix them. Because I think that racial equity social justice program provides a good framework, but we're not really accomplishing what we wanted to with just the framework.
Thank you. Gary, same question for you. I'm wondering what specific changes or actions you would seek to take as a board member to address policies or practices that are contributing to systemic racism at PPS. And
good. Thank you for the question. That's a big lift. You know, dealing with something that has been historically against people of color or kids of color. In the educational system. Historically, it's a big lift, and as we're looking to do that lift, we have to have buy-in from everyone. It can't just be the board. It has to be the board, it has to be the community, it has to be the government, the parents. You know, you have to have that global buy-in to really start looking at how do you break down systemic racism. The fact that it's been ingrained in American society, you know, that's a hard thing to try to chew on. But with that, the gains that Portland Public has started making, I think is another way of moving the needle a little bit further. There are some ways that we can actually get into bringing that representation back into the classrooms. We can help foster the schools that are working on that now, like the CSI and the TSI schools. What those are comprehensive support improvement schools. They actually give more money to those schools that are under represented in their school districts. So you have to take deliberate steps like those to look at how do we educate the ones that have been historically underrepresented and underserved. You know, so as we're doing that, you look at the teachers. You know, you have to look at the teachers. You have to think, hey, what are the teachers saying of how to get these kids at reading level by the 3rd grade? What are the teachers saying that how do we reach these kids by the 5th grade for math? And I think one way to do that is you have to have teachers of color who can relate to that child, who can understand that child, who that child can say, you know what, they look like me, so therefore I can be as well. I think that's a small mediocre part that you do to try to break that cycle. As an example, when I was in school, I had a couple Black teachers that was in our school building. even up through high school. And just those teachers is what made me change the direction of my life. So at the time back then, we was in drugs, and there was a lot of drugs and stuff going on. And they would question me because they knew what was going on to the neighborhood. They lived in the neighborhood. They lived down the street from us. And so by them being there, by them being present there, they were able to challenge us as African-American men, or boys at the time, to what it looks like to succeed. What do you need to succeed? What barriers, we know, and not to have an excuse because of the surroundings and the things that we was dealing with, to be able to succeed. And so when you start talking about how you break down that systemic racism piece, there's so many variables that goes with that. But one, I think it starts with getting people of color into those positions, getting those people of color on the board, getting those people of color in the administration, all the way down to, to the nurses and the janitors that we have, because these are the kids, when you're looking at it as a young boy, this is what you see. And if you only see one thing, then you really start questioning, why is that? Am I good enough? And so, just like I said, to break that down, it's the multiple things. Those are just one things that I think we can start with. Funding is another thing. How do we allocate funds to the schools that's underperforming, or to those kids that are not performing up to par? How do we support those kids? How do we make sure those kids have tutors? White kids, a lot of times, because of generational wealth, they able to get tutors for their kids. How do we provide those same support services for our kids? When you're looking at the PTA piece, wealthier schools can hire band teachers and science teachers because the money that they raise through their PTA. Well, that's going to keep on getting that educational gap, because they can afford to do that for their kids when our kids can't come to. The whole tax system that we based our school system on is another one. When you have a community where the value of your house is less, and the tax dollars is based off of your property taxes, well, then that district in that area is going to get less money, as opposed to a more affluent neighborhood where those tax dollars is going to be able to provide that school district or that area more money. So I think when we look at systemic racism, we have to fight it on all fronts. How do we equalize the education system? How do we equalize the economic things that's around that school, around that community? The economic barriers, the social barriers. You have to attack all those. And I think as a board member, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to try to tackle a lot of that stuff. Not that we're going to fix it all, but you can go out and talk to the communities. You can go and talk to employers to try to, if you know someone that maybe needs a job, hey, go talk to your network of folks to see if we can bring that to our community and to those kids that is underserved. So I think as you look at systemic racism, you have to hit it on all fronts. It ain't going to just be a one-trick pony and it's done. But once you hit all those aspects, and board members can play a part of that as well. So that's kind of my thing. Yeah, I could go on and on, but we don't have that much time.
And Gary, this question, I'll start off with you. And can you talk about just your connections with the schools in your zone? Like, what schools have you visited? How have you been involved as a volunteer or in some fashion? And also, I know for you, especially if you can address, I believe your wife is an administrator at PPS, and if that, if you can kind of address that and how you would be able to, or what you would tell voters in terms of the ability to hold PPS administration accountable.
Yes. So growing up in this neighborhood, I literally lived in this neighborhood all my life. It was since I was about 5, 6 when I moved over into the area of Zone 5. And so I have probably been to all the schools at some point. when my kids were in school, they actually went to Fabian, which I think is the border of 4 and 5. And then my daughter went to Beaumont, my kids went to Beaumont. So I've probably been to all the schools in my area. PTA done that with my kids growing up, from taking them on trips to outdoor school, which I love outdoor school. I went to outdoor school as well, but doing field trips to the zoo, to now hopefully, now the Children's Museum, which is unfortunately not going to be with us, that much longer, but just been involved. I've been an active parent, from in the class, volunteering, to coaching kids, some of my kids, basketball and track teams. Even right now, I'm a volunteer track coach at Benson High School. So I've been active in the community for a while, and continued and plan on continuing to be, even though most of my kids are out. I have 2 kids left at Portland Public Schools. One's a senior at Benson. The other one is a sophomore at Benson. So even after they're there, I still continue to plan to be a active role in the community. With the nonprofit that I run, Albina Sports Program, the majority of our kids are Portland Public School kids. And so outside of, doing that for the summer, and I end up going to kids' graduations and, kids' games outside of my own kids. So I told my wife, instead of us buying a SUV, we probably should have bought a bus, because we always having extra kids at the house. So the community piece and being a part of the district, and, as I said, visiting all the schools. I was there when they built the new Fabian, which was awesome, awesome endeavor. So that, as far as being in the community, is what I have done thus far. Now, as far as the my wife being at PPS, I think that's a great deal. I think it's because I am able to get insight on how the district works and how the district is run. I get insight on, some of the things that are needed. As far as keeping the being able to govern and having her as an administrator, and she'll probably kill me for this. But I always tell her, I say, hey, if there's a decision to make to where we have to close a program down versus y'all's salary, I think y'all's salary should be reduced so we can keep the programs. That's just how I am. That's just who I am, regardless if she works there or not. She knows I am 100% for the kids, and whatever needs to be done for the kids should be as well. So I think with the insight that she has there, and she's a great wife and a great employee at PPS. But even with her, my goal is to always make sure we are looking at kids first, period. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dana, same question for you, just in terms, I know you haven't been in Portland very long, but are you able to talk about, or do you have any familiarity with the schools in the zone? What kind of volunteering have you been able to do, recognizing that the past year there hasn't been much opportunity? If you can just talk about that, and why, like, as a newcomer to Portland, why Portlanders should, feel comfortable with sending you to the board.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned before, and as you noted, yeah, it's been a tremendous year. So being a family physician for the community during a pandemic, and because of social distancing, I really hadn't been able to engage with public service, with the schools, the way that I really wanted to. Certainly, I've talked and tried to help advocate and counsel with the parents that are in my very local community. Some of them are on the PTA or have worked with the PTA for Vernon. I've been to Vernon, and Fabian is also not too far from me, so I've visited there as well, and Jefferson. But yeah, I hadn't really been able to engage the way that I wanted to. outside of my time in Portland, I have worked in other communities. I volunteered to teach some kids in a vocational program in North Philly, some hands-only CPR, and they were doing some healthcare vocational training. And so I volunteered to teach them some of the cardiovascular physiology, things like that. So, I try to help support education when I can, worked as a tutor, all of those things. And then it is my job in my professional life to advocate for all my patients, but I kind of crosses over into the area of education a little bit when I start helping to craft and implement these individualized education plans and work on really making sure that students' needs are met from that perspective. So although I haven't had the opportunity to really do as much with the community as I would have hoped when I first came here, I do have a strong value and belief that community involvement is important, and hope to continue to serve the community as a board member. But if not, as things settle down with the pandemic, I'm hopeful that I can get engaged on PTAs and some of the other committees available.
Thank you. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the hour. I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to talk with me today about just what your priorities are and your campaigns. We will be coming out with our endorsements on Wednesday, April 28th, I believe, which is when ballots go out. But again, this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate your making the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great.
Yes, thank you for having me as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
Good day.
Bye-bye.